Roman, thank you so much for being on the Invicta Vita podcast today. I'm really grateful that you made time. I know how busy you are. You are the CEO of Rise Up. So thank you so much for being here today.
No, thank you for having me. It's great to be in the studio in the warm rather than the rainy London that we've got today.
The rainy London, that's very common, isn't it? So it's so wonderful to have you here. And I want to really share your story with our viewers and hear a bit about your path and your journey and what led you to actually creating Rise Up. So if I could take you to the very beginning, your early days in Manchester, you said you didn't have a traditional path. Talk me through that a little bit.
Yeah, it's really interesting when we talk about paths. I would love to stand here or sit here and say that, I always aspired to work in the charity sector. Quite frankly, I didn't. I came from quite a broken household. My parents split up when I was quite young. Unfortunately, a bit of domestic abuse going on there. And when I was around 10 years old, I managed to move in permanently with my mum. And became a bit of the man of the household sort of thing, and learned a lot of DIY, lots of painting the skirting boards, and actually social housing was such a big part of my life early on. And I mentioned that because it's kind of important in my trajectory when we kind of get into it. But unfortunately, the day before my 13th birthday, my mum was diagnosed with leukemia. So I kind of found myself not really knowing what to do with that information, and skipping school to go to consultants appointments with her. And I was really acting out and was quite frustrated and didn't really know how to handle my emotions. And unfortunately, I felt that the system didn't really get me, and my attendance was so low, but nobody really asked, why is my attendance low? And I ended up getting permanently excluded from school at age 14. And obviously, there's a legal responsibility for a parent to send their son or daughter to school. But I kind of realized pretty quickly that it would be very difficult for the local authority to take a woman with terminal illness to court over a school refusal. So I just wanted to spend as much time as possible with my mum. And, she kind of was very supportive of me. And then for my final 6 months of school, I went to a pupil referral unit. Those that work in the education space will know what it's like. For those that don't work in the education space, it's a bit like a zoo for all the naughty kids with limited resources. But I managed to scrape my GCSE grades through going to that provision. But then, unfortunately, my mum passed away just before I picked up those results, and kind of again back to a little bit of a rock bottom moment. Throughout the whole trajectory, I was making music and running music workshops because when I was age 14, I thought it was brilliant being kicked out of school, but there was only so much kind of Call of Duty and Xbox I could play before it got really boring. So I turned to kind of writing music to handle my emotions. And yeah, that was kind of a big part of my life. I look back on certain role models along the way. And interestingly enough, within the pupil referral unit system, there was a double art lesson on a Monday morning. Now, interestingly, for me being quite creative, you'd think I'd love double art. Absolutely hated it, especially on a Monday morning. But the careers advisor, Linda, which I speak quite openly about online as well. She's an amazing woman. She's 76 now, I think. We still keep in touch. And I used to just go and see Linda on a Monday morning and talk about careers and drink tea and eat biscuits. And, 8 months after I'd left the Pru, she wrote to me and sort of said, look, please don't delete this. I promise it'll be right up your street. And it was an apprenticeship in social housing. And interestingly enough, in that first trajectory, which I'm sure throughout the podcast we may touch on a little bit more, the social housing landlord that I went to work for actually owned the mother and baby unit that I was born in with my mum when she first kind of tried to kind of get away from my dad. So it was a real kind of things happen for a reason, I suppose, moment and realization. And yeah, that was kind of my upbringing to that point, I guess.
Thank you so much for sharing that vulnerability and that story. You obviously went through so much hardship. I can't even imagine what that must have been like. I'm sure your mum would be so proud of what you've achieved and where you are today. For our listeners today who have faced disadvantage, who faced hardship, and who internalize that and say, oh, I just can't go any further, or my life's broken, or it's over, what message do you have for them? How do you actually reject that narrative?
I think it's baby steps, to be honest with you. And I think, sometimes I still face difficult moments. There's not a day that goes by that I don't miss my mum, and wish that she was kind of here on earth to see some of the things that I'm involved with. And a lot of my life now features many kind of pinch myself moments. Just last night I was in the Leather Sellers Hall at a dinner, and age 15, telling me that I'd be at such a fancy dinner, I wouldn't believe, and I'd bite your hand off for it. But I think you're never really alone, and what I'd encourage people to do is to talk and to kind of find spaces that are safe to talk. And I think especially as young professionals, and in particular young men, we really struggle to talk about our feelings. And one of the big things that I've done now is me and my friends, and I was saying just before we came on air that I've got a 5 a.m. train tomorrow morning to York to do a run, but going for runs with my friends and groups of lads is kind of such an important part, because we go for brunch afterwards, we talk about things and just what's happened in the week, and we find that really kind of helps take the edge off it. So I think if you don't have that network, or you don't feel comfortable doing that, try journaling. Like I write down on my notes, and sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and I've got a notepad next to my bed, and I'll just scribble what I'm thinking just to try and get it off my mind. But the worst thing we can do is bottle it up. There is some real dark days out there, and this isn't to gloss over it, but it will get better. I certainly, when my mum first passed away, I never thought it would get better, and I never thought I'd be happy again. And for those that have experienced loss, it doesn't get easier, but you just develop kind of coping mechanisms, and hopefully, she will be proud. And kind of, one of the things that I do now is I'm lucky enough to be able to travel, and my mum, for all the time that she was on this earth, never got to go abroad. And it's kind of a bit of always taking a little picture with her, of her with me abroad, and it's just, that's my kind of ritual sort of thing.
Yeah, I love that. I really resonated with you when you first shared with me that your mum had passed, because my dad passed away and I was incredibly close to him, and I really struggled. And I actually, despite being someone who normally communicates quite well, I bottled it all up. And then I got to a point where I just exploded, and I thought, this isn't possible. I actually need to talk to someone about it. So I think being able to talk to people around it, you having that strong circle around you that's really positive, that helps guide you, non-judgmental. I think journaling is incredibly helpful. I journal so much now, and I feel that sometimes just writing something down gives me that release. So I completely understand where you're coming from when you say that. And I would encourage our listeners, if they're going through anything, speak to someone, don't feel ashamed, journal, write it down, and you'll feel so much better for it. I want to ask you, when was the turning point for you when you actually realized, I want to build a system and make a difference?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of my phrasing now is I'm calling for systemic change, and there's lots of platforms that we're trying to do that on. And I don't think there was one single moment where it was like, I am now going to change the system or call for that kind of change. I think there's been lots of little moments that didn't make sense on my squiggly career journey to date. I think I've always been someone that stood up for what I believed in. And even growing up, I've got a younger sibling, and we've seen some real difficult things. And I was always the loud one that would call it out. And I remember being quite young and being scared and standing in front of my mum when domestic abuse was happening. But I've always kind of had that bit of fire. So I think when I was making music, I was heavily involved in the kind of the youth music scene up in Hume Moss Side in Manchester. And I decided to create a bid and get some funding from Starbucks Youth Action Fund, and we were successful, and we created a tour. So that was the first kind of bit of systems change, I suppose, at that moment. And then I guess it just kind of fell into place through becoming an apprentice ambassador, and what tended to happen is, because in theory I'd come good, because statistically young people like me are on a roadmap to prison, really, from pupil referral units, and that's a whole bigger issue that needs looking at. But I joined the apprentice ambassador program up in Manchester, and in essence they used to wheel me out to the other pros and speak to the other naughty kids, just about my journey. And I think I quickly realized that actually I'm in a position to open doors. And one of the things that sticks with me is, we can talk about, lived experience. And there's a lot of talk at the moment about lived experience leadership, which is great. We've all got experiences, and I think that can be a superpower. And I had a roundtable yesterday, and we were talking specifically about care experience young people. And I always kind of smile in the sense that it's very easy for me to come on platforms like this and talk about my experience now as a CEO. But 17, 18, 19-year-old Roman, would I be openly sitting in environments and saying I'm a high school dropout? Absolutely not, because I didn't feel safe enough to be able to do that. And I think we have to create safe spaces. So I think it's been a combination of moments over the years. And as things and projects that I've launched have gone well, I started to realize, well, actually, I should share more of my story. I should stay true to where I've come from, because actually there is so many fantastic young people in the country at the moment, and we get such a bad name. Where young people are lazy, young people don't want to work, young people are making up anxiety and mental health challenges, and frankly, I'm quite sick of it. So, that is very much what led me to hopefully creating a bold response to UK youth unemployment.
I'm so glad you said that, because I hear this so often. And as you know, Invicta Vita is a coaching business helping a lot of young people as well as some more mature clients. But I hear this narrative so often. The young are lazy. They don't want to work. What's this mental health issue? I never complained about my mental health when I was that age. Why don't they want to work? And so many of my clients are desperate to work. They want a job. A lot of them actually do have university degrees, and they're really bright and really capable, but they feel so disillusioned, disenchanted. And when they hear people saying, your generation is lazy, you don't want to work, it makes them feel even more anxious. So where has this narrative come from? Why are people saying that young people are lazy?
That's a huge question, isn't it? I'll try and be as least offensive as possible here. No, I think what we've got to take some kind of positives here, that mental well-being and mental health is being discussed more. And that's something I'm immensely proud of. Maybe 20, 30 years ago, a CEO wouldn't come on a podcast and talk about vulnerabilities of growing up and how low they felt and things like that. So actually the fact that, society's become more progressive and enables spaces to talk about mental health is a real positive thing. Now, I understand for the older generation why they would think, oh, why are we just hearing about mental health now? We day in, day out, I get to see some amazing young people. But the harsh reality is, and you see this through the coaching side of things, that often people are applying for 150, 200 roles. They're receiving blanket rejections. Now, if any one of us, no matter what level we're at, received, 100 plus rejections, you start to question yourself. You get anxious about next steps. There's so much instability at the moment, disproportionately high levels of rent, housing insecurity. So I think there's so many issues, not least, social media as well. So I think it's a real volatile set of circumstances for young people to deal with at the moment. And I think they're doing incredibly well. But what they don't need is people to just blanket label them as lazy or wanting to scrounge off benefits and things like that. I've never, ever met a young person at age 11, 12, 13 years old that aspires to finish school and sign on at their local job centre office. And I think this narrative is really, really dangerous. The realities of the job centre office is it's really intimidating for a young person to access. You often walk through the doors, it's an outdated building, you've got G4S security guards on the door looking you up and down. You feel such a sense of shame to walk through those doors. And really it comes down to the fact that the system isn't geared up at the moment to support them. And that's something that I'm really passionate about hopefully changing and working with people to come up with a better solution.
I'm glad you said that, because it can be really intimidating for the young. I want to talk about Rise Up. It's more than just a charity. It's really been described as a movement. How is it different? Tell me about it.
That's a great question. I think, I wanted to do something differently with a charity, and I think the charity sector sometimes gets bad press. I think I've worked in and around the education space since leaving school, transitioning from an apprenticeship in social housing to then working for an apprenticeship provider, and then facilitating around 50,000 work experience placements a year for a careers and work experience provider. And I got to a point in my career where it was kind of like, I knew that I always wanted to work in the charity space. It was just a question of when. The typical trajectory is go and make your money in the private sector, wait until you're, late 40s, 50s kind of thing, and then go and work for a charity because it'll make you feel really good. And I thought, if I feel so compelled to make a change, why don't I be ballsy and do it now? And so that was the journey. I'd spoke to a range of different charities, and Talent Rise, as it once was, and now I've rebranded it as Rise Up, had probably the most difficult job. It was a charity that was on the brink of collapse, but I felt I could build something really special with it. And I suppose what's helped me is recognizing where I've come from and trying to advocate for young people just like me. We've looked at how we can do things differently. So one of my proudest moments was the hiring manager that took a chance on me, that became like a mother figure to me, now works for the charity as our head of programs. Our staff team are quite young as well, and there's obviously different challenges and different positives with that. But also it's recognizing that just because I've got my own version of events and my own lived experience, that isn't the exact blueprint. So we've done things like create sector-specific working groups with headline employers. We've created a youth advisory board to put the youth voice at the heart of everything we do. It's that recognizing that to really tackle youth unemployment, it's going to take a range of stakeholders to come to the table. I think sometimes I go on media interviews and they expect me to just blame the government because that's the easy narrative. Well, government and policy have a part to play, just like employers have a part to play, just like, organizations like mine kind of have to meet young people at face value and make sure they're not operating on a tick box exercise, because we're dealing with humans at the end of the day. There isn't a one size fits all model. And I think the quicker we realize that and start to work with a young person instead of judging them and creating those safe spaces, the better for all involved.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. You've created some really meaningful partnerships with a number of employers. What, in your opinion, really helps open the doors for young people with employment?
I'm a big believer in kind of recognizing that not everybody's going to be polished for an interview. And I know we may potentially talk about the rise in AI in job search. But actually, AI can be a force for good. It can be a force for bad. And we've seen that for some young people, they're getting filtered out of the process. We can see that, a lot of our work, we deal with individuals from BAME backgrounds. And there's been examples of those individuals being filtered out of the application process, which simply isn't good enough. For me, it's about kind of empowering that young person. So we do like a 2-day employability program called Building Aspirations, but we also put a sector-specific spin on that. Some of the best partnerships that we've had is when we take them through that 2-day trajectory. We continue to remain involved with the young person, so they're assigned a mentor to guide them through the job search process, but also beyond. So when they transition into the workplace, they've still got that support network. But we typically start with paid internships, a structured paid internship over a 3-month period. as a way to take that pressure of yes, no, are you answering all the questions correctly in a job interview? So I think co-design is probably the best part of any partnership, is making sure that the employer's voice is heard, but also making sure that that young person's voice is heard as well. And for some of the individuals we deal with, especially from neurodiverse backgrounds, they're just not going to excel in a traditional assessment center or a job interview, but actually they're bloody awesome when they get into the workplace. So I think it's about time we start looking at better pathways for them.
I think that's really relevant. I actually have some clients who are neurodiverse and they really struggle in interviews, and it's really tricky for them because they get labeled as, well, they weren't enthusiastic enough, or they were really nervous or anxious, but the interviewer doesn't necessarily know they're neurodiverse, and they don't necessarily give them an opportunity to shine. And sometimes it's just a very structured interview, but doesn't actually look at the other side and the skill set. So if someone's watching this now thinking, I've applied to over 100 jobs, I've been literally ghosted, people aren't even coming back to me, or people aren't giving me feedback, so I don't know where I'm going wrong, what piece of advice would you have for them?
I think fundamentally you're not alone. And I think that's the most dangerous narrative that unfortunately people seem to feel when they go through the job search process is, it's me, there's something wrong with me, I'm the only one. Now, you look at headline data, we know that unemployment's just hit the 5% mark across the board, which is shocking, and we need to do a lot more work to resolve that. But just that memory that you're not alone in this process, and sometimes it does feel incredibly lonely, but just keep persevering. One of the best exercises that I enjoy doing with some of our clients is we support them to develop an elevator pitch. And it's just fantastic to see the change in them to recognize their own superpowers and what makes them unique. Because in an age of AI, when a lot of the cover letters and applications are looking the same, that elevator pitch, the willingness to share your own experiences, is what can really make you stand out. So I think just keep on going with it. That's my best piece of advice.
Keep persevering, absolutely. Confidence is a real issue as well. A lot of people don't feel confident. They don't know how to stand out from the crowd. So how can you teach confidence in a really real and pragmatic way?
I think it's breaking everything down into bite-sized chunks. It's not important to have all of the answers at once. I think a lot of things are gained over short bursts of experiences. And for me, it's really bizarre that, there is a related field across all of my career journey so far, but actually if you put it out on a linear scale, it doesn't make any sense. And I've probably had the most squiggly journey to a CEO ever, really, which I suppose is typical for a lot of CEOs in the country. But I think we have to kind of keep going with it, I would say.
You touched upon AI, and this is very topical. You hear of AI everywhere. Do you see that as a challenge and that a lot of jobs are suddenly going to disappear? Or do you think this can be an ally to the youth of today? Where do you see it?
Gosh, how long have we got? No, I think AI isn't going anywhere, is the reality of the situation. So I think it's about learning how we can best work with it. I think there's a demand from society for the human touch on things, and we see that organizations are putting jobs at risk in call centers, but actually I'm sure for you, even when you've had a complaint, we want to speak to a human and we want to deal with it. So I think AI needs to catch up for the current challenges that young people are facing, and we need to look at how it can complement some of that existing work, because the harsh reality is people are using AI and not even thinking anymore. They go onto a chat GPT, and I've seen examples of this where young people have been quite open that they've completed an entire 2 years of college just using chat GPT without doing any thinking. And I think for employers, we want to see those problem-solving skills. So I think if you use it in the right way, it can be incredibly powerful, but just don't lose your own authentic voice within the process. Because at the round table yesterday, a lady was to my right-hand side, and she talked about 4 of the 10 applications she received for a marketing position read the same. exactly the same because it's clearly come through ChatGPT. And apparently one of the applications didn't bother to take out the ChatGPT guidance that came out at the at the bottom of it, sort of thing. So yeah, it's just about being aware that it is there. But like anything evolutionary, it will just change the way that we work and the way that we deal with things.
Yeah, I think it's reminding people to just be authentic. There's only one you, and ultimately, people want to see who the real you is. They want to hire you. They don't want to hire a robot, right?
100%.
So it's being authentic and not being scared of that authenticity. I want to talk about the job market with you. A lot of people say it's broken. Do you think it's broken, and why is it broken?
I think the job market is broken. I think what we're seeing at the moment is there's an assumption that there's a lot of entry-level jobs. Quite frankly, there isn't. There isn't enough entry-level jobs to deal with the demand. I think for certain hiring managers, they're doing it in a manner they've always done it without questioning why are they doing it that way. And a lot of our work with employers is on the education piece and is to kind of stand in boardrooms and to call them out for outdated practices. So, for an entry-level job, you don't need 3 years of industry experience. We need to remove that bracket from it completely. And the way that job descriptions are worded sometimes are completely wrong and really bizarre, quite frankly, and is confusing for the end user. And I think, the problem is with the AI situation is it's a lot quicker for people to churn out job applications. So, from a DWP perspective, the job centres, to qualify for universal credit, you're having to evidence 30, 35 hours of job search activity. So you throw out a load of applications generated by ChatGPT and you tick that box. Brilliant. The problem is for the employers, they're receiving 500-600 applications for one position. Now, how do they effectively filter and then give the right feedback? So now we're in a situation where it's a really vicious cycle. You've got, I will say young people, but anyone out in the jobs market at the moment completely disillusioned because there just isn't enough time to provide that personalized feedback from an employer's perspective, but they also don't realize the implications of the 200th rejection that an individual's received. So I think there needs to be better signposting, there needs to be better coordination across services. And really, if you're a hiring manager listening to this, you need to ask yourself the question, why are you hiring using those practices?
I completely agree with that. And I know you said you don't want to bash the government, and this isn't about government bashing, but what can the government be doing more of in line with employers as well to make these jobs more equitable and for young people to feel that they've got more of a chance?
I think across the board, we need to look at the data and we need to look at where people's starting points are. I think one of my frustrations is it's a lot of the same old, and we wonder why we've got the same result. So if we look at employability schemes, a lot of them are delivering the same old curriculum. We've got skills boot camps that promise jobs at the end, but there isn't really jobs at the end. They're just ticking a box from a funding perspective. And I've been really clear that I wanted to rip up the rule book. That comes with a challenge because the reality is people want us to jump through hoops to qualify for certain funding pots. We're refusing at the moment to do that, but that kind of keeps us as a smaller organization. So I think, I guess, government need to coordinate policy. A lot of my work is centered around young people. And, I, unfortunately, through circumstances of my mum passing, I had to then privately rent because the social housing waiting list was just too long for me. That was astronomical costs. Part of my first role was working across 2 supported accommodation schemes. And back then, the young people were advised not to work because they couldn't afford their rents, and it doesn't make sense for them to work. That's still happening now. We need to look at housing policy. How can we make, one of my calls is let's look at the housing policy. Let's look at how people are incentivized to work. No individual should be worse off through going to work, But equally, we've got to recognize that and there's a big focus on social mobility and leveling the playing field, but the reality is the cost of living is so high versus the salaries that some of these young people are facing. we need to find a way to balance the books, and that could be through grants. It could be through incentives on rent. But sometimes my frustration with government is it almost feels like they don't think about what it's like in practice. They'll just make a blanket policy announcement. That also leaves the employers confused as well. We talk about a guarantee of a placement for a young person that wants it. Well, industry's not ready for that either. So, yeah, I think I'm always interested. We make a lot of announcements in this country, and there's a lot of inquiries going on about youth unemployment and the unemployment picture at the moment. We have a lot of data already, and there's lots of fantastic work going on. We don't need more inquiries. We need action, and I think it's about how can we get people round table to come up with a solution.
You're right. We need action, and it's such a problem to the extent that you've got people who went to university, some top universities, top degrees, did really well, and they can't get a job. And this isn't after just 4 or 5 applications. You've got some people saying they've applied to thousands of jobs. I mean, the statistics are crazy. So then that poses another question: is university worth it? Should parents be saving up all that money to pay for university only then to find out that their children can't get a job?
I'll be careful because I came through an apprenticeship route. I should probably point out, I think, university has a place in society. I think it's, and a lot of my early career working for an apprentice provider was sort of talking about my own experiences of actually, I enjoy life much more as an apprentice and earning that salary and still getting to socialise. I believe that some of the universities should be held to account because, you enroll in significant numbers of students. They're incurring significantly high levels of debt through Student Finance England, and there isn't the roles at the end of it. Now, I think that it is a very difficult process because universities are businesses at the end of the day. But within that, if you're not delivering on outputs, and I would say an output is not only the academic success, but it's kind of where do your alumni end up and how are your employability teams supporting those young people, then I think that kind of statistic needs to be very clearly published so that the parents are educated enough to make an informed decision along with the young person on what is the best pathway for them.
Do you think there are any industries in particular that are open to different types of skill sets where you see a lot of opportunities for young people today?
I think, we're doing a piece of work across a range of industry areas. Digital tech is an obvious area where quite a lot of the time you've got entrepreneurs that are wanting to think differently and wanting to provide access pathways. We're also doing a piece of work in the insurance sector, which is really interesting, actually. Never thought I'd say insurance is really interesting. But when I've spoken to staff in the insurance sector, a lot of them feed back to me that they just fell into it. And what we're trying to do is look at, okay, how can we create attractive career pathways into the sector? Because when you look at those staff that say they fell into it, they've been in the sector for 15, 20 years. And often for some of these industries, it isn't just you're dealing with paperwork. There's still marketing teams there. There's still IT teams. There's still HR teams. So I think generally, we're working with some fantastic organizations that are really happy to come around table and to discuss potential solutions. I think once you have that collective power, and we talk a lot, and I talk a lot actually with my staff team around the power of one. And that's kind of an ethos across the organization, especially with some of the young people that we deal with and that whole change in hearts and minds. But I think if you start with one organization, they will generally pilot new approaches and start to think differently. And then when you see some wins, then you can kind of add more to it. So it's just kind of, for me as a leader, I feel a responsibility to be dogged with employers and just to keep going and keep pushing and keep putting in those cheeky asks to hopefully open up more doors.
I love it, those cheeky asks. What's one bold change you could make today about how young people re-enter the workplace? What would that be? What would that look like?
I believe it's a structured pathway. I think it's a case of let's meet them at face value. Let's not cast aspersions and judgments on them being lazy or them not being ready for the world of work. Well, hang on a minute. Let's get them ready for the world of work. Let's work with the stakeholders to get them ready. Let's look at a kind of a pathway from wherever their starting point is. How can we take those baby steps to build the confidence up? How can we then transition, whether it's through a workplace visit? Interestingly enough, we're down in London, and clearly I'm a northerner, hence my dulcet tones. But I always reflect on a young man. We brought a group of young people to visit Microsoft. Fantastic experience for them. And we got out of Euston Station, and this young man turned around to me and went, "Oh my God, they're real." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He went, "The buses, they're real." I went, "We've got buses in Manchester." We went, "No, the red buses, the way they curve down at the back, I thought they were only in movies." And that's the reality of what we're dealing with. For a lot of this COVID generation, they haven't seen certain environments. They haven't seen certain workplaces. So I think if we can do a coordinated approach and guarantee structured internships and things like that for young people, it would have such a profound impact and really start to see their value. And actually, part of the work I'm piloting at the moment is we rely heavily on people from industry acting as volunteer mentors for our young people. And often organizations get, an allocation of volunteer days per year, and typically they're used to go and paint a fence. So I'm sorry for any organization listening that needs a fence painting, but I'm calling this out. What we do is flip it on its head and say, well, look, give an hour a week to a young person that's closest to the labor market and start to support them through. And actually, we see that that's such an amazing impact for that organization, but also for the young person. But what we're starting to pilot now is actually young people are feeding back that they need to see to believe. So we're piloting launching a peer mentorship program. So for those young people that have only just come through a program, maybe still within their first year of employment, we're raising their aspirations to put them in a position to empower other young people. So we're really trying to think, what are the blockers? And actually, I'm more likely to listen to one of my peers that has walked my shoes a year ago rather than someone in the benefits office, for example.
Complete sense. I get that. I think internships are so useful, and I'm always encouraging my clients to get that work experience. And I think part of the issue is when you go to university, it's very academic. And actually, a lot of students are very focused on passing their exams and doing really well. But then when they come to the end of their degrees, they haven't got any work experience. And then employers get a bit nervous because they say, well, why am I going to hire this person? He or she has zero work experience. Whereas you get another candidate that comes through and that has all this work experience. So who's likely to get the job? The one with the work experience. So it's encouraging people to think differently and not just think of the academics. And during your summer holidays, for example, maybe go and do an internship, get some work experience, build up that CV effectively. If you could give your 16-year-old self one piece of advice, knowing what you know today, what would it be?
Gosh, lots of advice probably would have been helpful on my journey. I'd probably say to myself that you're not behind. I think at that time, I thought I was always going to be defined. I'd just picked up my exam grades. I'd just lost my mum. Quite frankly, I didn't want to work. My understanding of the world of work would be that if I don't enjoy the classroom, I'm going to have to go and work on a building site. And I think you don't have to have it all figured out. And a lot of where I struggled in my early years was when I transitioned into work, I threw myself into it. Now, I would say actually looking back, I'm relatively driven and I've worked a crazy amount of hours. But it was interesting, you touched on and were vulnerable about losing your dad, which I'm sorry to hear, by the way. But actually, looking back, my coping mechanism was throw myself into work, which isn't healthy, actually. And it was only kind of years later down the line where, I was fortunate enough to be in a position to pay for counselling that it really helped and I was able to work through it. But I've had many moments of burnout and many moments of like, I'm not doing enough. And, I look at this and I was having this conversation last night is like, I was next to a young man, and he turned around. He said, "Roman, I'm turning 25, and I don't think I've done enough." And I said, "Imagine how I feel. I'm knocking on the door of 30, and I don't feel like I've done enough." And I think, there isn't a specific timeline that we've got to follow. So I think if I could say that and make it really clear, that would have removed a lot of the pressure.
That's such good advice, and I'm sure the listeners here will be grateful for that, because sometimes you think there's just one path, and then if you haven't followed it, you think that's it, it's over. And actually, even 30, that's really young, and there's just so much more you can do, and you don't have to have it all figured out. And you can have a career pivot at 30 or even at 40, and I think we're seeing more of that, and it's healthy. What's one quality you wish more CEOs had?
Gosh, I'm trying to. I've got two.
Yeah, two.
Can I do two?
You can, absolutely.
I think humility, and the ability to listen. I think I don't profess to have it all figured out. I like to hear feedback from all parties. I have a mentor, a really experienced mentor who's the COO at Intac Insurance Group, actually. And it's just a different layer of experience. And I think, that, I guess, humility to share a problem that I may face has really helped me in my leadership journey. And I think I was probably relatively young to become a CEO. I was 27 when I took over the charity, which is completely against all sector guidelines, but it seems to be working out. We've kind of supercharged on our growth. We're having amazing impact with young people, but that just comes with listening, and I'm always wanting to listen. And my team, we've got a really small team as well, and sometimes when we do things like this and different media stuff, everyone thinks, Rise Up will be huge kind of thing. It's me and 3 other people. It's still relatively small and green in our kind of journey, but actually, that listening has been so important to me.
I actually think that listening is one of the most important qualities anyone can have. It's a superpower, actually. And if you are seen as a good listener, ultimately, you know how to be a good leader, which is very different from being a boss. And even in relationships, often people say the breakdown happens because people are just not listening to one another. It's not about hearing, it's about listening. And I think that is just so underrated, actually. And I agree with you. I think, and humility as well. I think sometimes people just need to know how to be humble and actually to let their team make mistakes and let people learn instead of being so controlling. I also want to ask you, is there a book or a quote that really had an impact on you?
Gosh, I do listen, like most of your listeners, to podcasts and read where I can. I would say there's a quote, I think, is it Tony Roberts? Gosh, it's proximity is power. And that just really resonated with me. And, we started this with take me back to the young years in Manchester. A lot of my original group of people that I hung out with are in, really difficult situations. I've had friends that have unfortunately been killed. I've had friends that have ended up in prison, and I feel incredibly lucky. And now as time's gone on, my friendship group, a lot of them are sort of 10, 15 years older than me. All of the group that I'm going to York with actually tomorrow are 10, 15 years older, and they just have different life experiences. And I think being around those people has really helped me, because I think being a 20-something-year-old with all of the pressure that you carry and all of the kind of the partying and things that is associated with that, having that calming influence around me has really kind of supercharged my career. So I think it's, you are who you surround yourselves with. And I think that's something that we've all got to consider when we kind of stop and take a look in the mirror, really.
I agree. I always say your network is actually your net worth.
100%, yeah.
One last question I really want to ask you. the future of work in one word.
Wow, that's a question. I would just say potential. I think there's so much potential in the future of work, and I get that it's daunting. It's daunting for me when I see unemployment's at 5%. It's daunting for me when I compare us with our international counterparts and we're dropping below the middle of the pack, which simply isn't good enough. But I think there's so much potential, and that's the really exciting bit. You know, we listen to stories, and you know, I'm inspired by so many people that I meet, and despite the headlines, I think people want to give back. And we have an ethos here that it's a hand up, not a handout. And I think that narrative is so important, because people don't want handouts, you know, but let's give them that hand up, because like you said, your network is your net worth. And I think it all intertwines.
Roman, thank you so much for being on the Invicta Vita podcast. Your message is one of hope, of potential. Your story is one of resilience. It's really inspiring. And I hope the listeners today feel not alone and feel a little bit closer to reaching their goals, and to seeing and hearing your story and knowing that hardship doesn't define you. It actually should be that fire that pushes you and that says, actually, I'm not going to let my difficult circumstances or my loss define me. That's going to be the fire in my belly that pushes me forwards. And no is not an option. Anything is possible. And it's having that resilience and that amazing network around you that believes in you.
Brilliant. No, thank you so much for having me. It's been a really interesting discussion.
I've loved it. Thank you so much. This was Roman Dibdin on the Invicta Vita podcast. Thank you, Roman.
Thank you.